Hello. So today we're going to continue our conversation or our discussion about the Great Depression with how it starts to end, and that's with the New Deal. So that is what we're looking at today, something called the New Deal. So during the first few years of the Great Depression, we had President Herbert Hoover as our president. And his idea was that if Americans thought positively, they had positive thoughts, that it would solve the Great Depression. He did not think it was the government's job to get involved with the Great Depression. He thought that it was going to work itself out. But after really 2.5 years of the Great Depression, Americans realized that is not going to get us out of the Great Depression, and they were looking for new leadership. So in 1932, in the election, most Americans at a landslide vote for who will be called president, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which we will kind of call FDR as his acronym. And FDR is he's from the Democratic Party, and he believed that the government needed to be more hands-on, and that it was the only way, he thought, that we were going to end the Great Depression. And you can see here too, in 1932, all the states that are in blue voted for FDR. All the states in red voted for President Hoover. So you can see that FDR won most of the states. And here they are here at going to the inauguration. Here is President Hoover, and here who is going to be the next president, FDR, on their way for inauguration. It's tradition for presidents to have like coffee or tea before the inauguration, the president and the incoming president. So that's where they're coming from. All right. So in March, because up until more recently, the inauguration was in March and not January. It has been switched since then. But in March of 1933, FDR is sworn in as president, and immediately he starts 100 days of intense work to help the nation. And he promised Americans a new deal. Like, you know what, you're going to get a good deal with this. You know, if you buy this car, I can give you a good deal kind of thing. We're going to give Americans a new deal to help them get out of the Great Depression. And this flurry of activity is known as the 100 Days. So FDR's philosophy and his belief is that in order to get us out of the Great Depression, we had to get people help and we had to get people back to work, because that was the only way we were going to get out of the Great Depression, is by getting people jobs and getting people the help that they need. And he thought the way to do this was through what's called deficit spending, which means the government's going to have to spend more money than it has. So think of a deficit as kind of like debt. So the government, even if it doesn't have money, is going to have to spend money in order to get people the help they need and in order to get people back to work. So that is FDR's approach. And very quickly, Congress passes 15 major pieces of legislation or laws that start making the government's role larger and getting the government more involved in the economy and also the welfare, so taking care of its citizens. So the first thing that FDR tackles is the banks. We need to get the banks in order. And so the day after he becomes president, he declares a bank holiday. So all the banks in the country shut down. Now remember, 1933 was at the height of when all those banks closed. We had, I think it was 4,000 banks closed in 1933 on top of thousands of banks the years prior. So FDR says we've got to do something to save the banks so that we can save the cash that people have inside the banks, and to make sure that people feel confident in the banks again. So he closes all the banks, and he passes an emergency act which allows the Treasury Department to inspect each of the nation's banks. And only banks that were able to reopen, that had cash to reopen, could reopen. So there we go. So only banks that were safe to keep your money in could reopen. And then on top of that, he passes another act which creates the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC insurance. And this at the time made sure that account holders were guaranteed up to $5,000 in the bank. So if the bank closed, they were guaranteed to get at least $5,000 of their dollars out of their savings, or up to $5,000. Today, that is up to $250,000. So you are guaranteed up to $250,000 to come back out of the bank if your bank closes for some reason. So this provides more confidence for Americans in the banks, and it starts to make our banks safe again. So the next thing he does is create a ton more programs. It's actually called alphabet soup because they're all acronyms and they all do different things. But I just kind of pulled out some of the more important ones. First is the Federal Securities Act. This is making sure that stock information is accurate and truthful, and they are the ones who will I don't want to say they don't really get them in trouble, but they will investigate people if they look like they are doing like shady stuff in the stock market. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, which said that farmers could receive money from the government if they did not grow crops. So it's kind of like a subsidy. Actually, in Calvert County, we had something similar to this in the 90s. I remember when I was growing up, the farmers were paid by the government not to grow tobacco. So it was a subsidy because we were trying, cigarettes are bad. And then the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which really focused on really hard hit areas like in Appalachia. And this tried to give people in Appalachia dams, obviously, and water, and also those dams would make electricity easier to get to those places in the Tennessee Valley. But this is also how we got electricity to lots of rural areas all over the country. In fact, Calvert County, that is how we got electricity here, was through the New Deal. There was not electricity all throughout the county in the 1930s, but this is what brought it to Calvert County. Just some more, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, put a lot of young men to work. They went and they built roads and parks and planted trees, and they planted 200 million trees in the Dust Bowl to not only give people jobs, but also to help break up those winds. And you can see right here, this is the lines of trees that were created in between farms to kind of slow the winds down and to try to ease the dust storm. The Public Works Administration provided money to states to construct more schools and community buildings. And probably the biggest thing to come out of the New Deal is Social Security Act. This said that anybody who got paid, got paid at some point in their life, legitimately, was taxed and whatever. So if you got a job, and you got a paycheck and you paid in to that, then you will get a little bit of that paycheck back when you become like of retiring age at 65, and that's to make sure that the elderly are not, they still have money coming in. And so that's Social Security, and that we still have today, and that comes from the New Deal. Another thing that President Roosevelt did, or FDR did, is that he did something called fireside chats. So he really wanted to make sure that he was clear and that the public knew exactly what was happening. This is a time before television, so if he wanted to get his message to a lot of Americans, the easiest way to do that was radio. Most Americans had radios in their homes. It would be kind of like saying, like, do you have a television in your home now? Most Americans had radios in their homes in the 1930s. And he would go on and he would give these fireside chats, and Americans all over the country would listen to him talk about the new programs he was doing, kind of the state of the nation. Honestly, it reminds me a lot, if anyone's following Governor Hogan, he does a press conference pretty much once a week, sometimes multiple times in a week, about different things, about the COVID, about the response to what happened at the Capitol, about the economy. So he does he does his press conferences to kind of let American Marylanders know what's up going on in Maryland and how he's handling it. FDR's fireside chats were very similar to that. But of course, you can't make everybody happy. So not everybody agreed with the New Deal. He had critics on both sides. So on the left, which is he was part of the Democratic Party, so he was more on the left side of the political spectrum, but they didn't think that the New Deal was doing enough. They argued that more needed to be done. And then on the right, the conservatives, which would have been the Republican Party, they thought the government was getting too involved, that it was spending too much money, and that it was interfering with our free market economy, that we were taking that laissez-faire approach away, and that made them nervous. So some people said that this was an abuse of power by FDR, that he created too many agencies, spent too much of the federal government's money. Some people said he wasn't doing enough. So there we are with the New Deal. Now, in the end, some of the legacies of the New Deal are, the biggest legacy is that the government gets more involved in the daily lives of the citizens. We are no longer going to be a laissez-faire. Now, there are time periods where the government is more hands-off, but once the New Deal takes place, a lot of the programs that are created are still around today, like Social Security, like FDIC insurance. Another thing that happens is the federal government gets larger. If we're having all these new agencies, they are new agencies that are part of the government, and we are going to have more people working in those agencies. And finally, it kind of becomes the norm for our government to be in debt like all the time. And so we see that today, and that is really the New Deal is when that takes off. The New Deal does not end the Great Depression on its own. It is like a two-part effort. The second thing that ends the Great Depression and really what kind of really makes it go to a grinding stop is World War II and our mobilization to get troops over there, to get supplies, to fight against the Axis powers. That's really what brings the Great Depression to an end. So it's New Deal and World War II. All right, so for your assignment for this week, which is the last new work that you have to do outside of class, kind of, is the New Deal. So you're going to be using a reading to help you answer some questions and complete a chart about the New Deal. So let me show you where that is. Okay, so if you go into this week's folder, week of January 11th, you will find the New Deal reading that goes with it and the New Deal assignment. So the New Deal assignment, this is the reading that you're going to use for it. Again, please use this reading and not random things on the internet. So everything you need is in this reading. So everything you need to know about the New Deal for this assignment, right here. Okay, and so for your assignment, it is going to be right here. And you are going to be using that reading to learn a little bit more about the New Deal. So it's going to be a little bit more in depth than what we talked about in class, but you're going to find out what was going on with it. You're going to find out some cause and effects, some more about Social Security, all that lovely stuff. And at the end, you have your big question. So just a reminder that this is the last out of class assignment we're going to have for second quarter. We are going to be having a second quarter benchmark, which is going to be an EBOS. It's going to be a test, but it's going to be more like a quiz grade, and that will be the last grade for second quarter, but it's something that we're going to be doing inside class. So not really something you need to worry about completing outside of class, and you will have the entire class period to do it. So technically it's the last new, I don't want to say homework, but new class assignment that you got to do. All right, so this also wraps up Unit 3. So we're going to be moving on, and after our kind of review of the Great Depression and after our EBOS county exam, we're going to be starting World War II. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and see you next time.